Hello and welcome to Stephen Fuller Pastels. I'm Stephen Fuller and it's lovely to have you along today. If you've joined me from YouTube, fantastic, it's amazing to have you here. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you get some value from it. If you fancy doing some of the longer tutorials, you can find them at my Patreon page and I'll pop the link up. If you've joined me from my Patreon page, thank you so much for your support. Now today's work we're going to do is really linked to the desire that many artists have to become more painterly in their work. And I'm hoping I'm going to show you a technique that you'll be able to use, whatever sort of artist you are, in making your work more painterly. I hope you get an awful lot from it and enjoy doing it. So the technique we're going to have a look at today is the use of lost and found lines. This technique was used by many of the great masters of landscape work, and it's a technique used to titillate the viewer and to engage them more strongly with your piece of work. And I hope you find some skills in doing this today that you can apply some of those secrets that the masters used to use. But before we get on to the use of lost and found lines, let's have a bit of a look at the background and what they are and where they come from really and why we use them. So first of all, let's go right back to the beginning and look at how light's formed. As many of us know, and I'm sure as all of you know, light is formed from energised atoms. All in our atoms in our local star, which is the sun, are bouncing around, knocking off each other, having energy absorbed and emitted, and they all emit light of a different frequency. And some of that light we see. As you can see on the diagram in front of us now, I've got a whole spectrum that is produced by our sun, and the little tiny bit that's been expanded is a visible light. And that's the bit that we can see, running from red at one end, the low energy end, up to blue and violet at the high energy end. But the thing that's important to see from this diagram is that there's an awful lot of the spectrum that we don't see. All the stuff down through infrared, microwave and radio waves, all the stuff up from ultraviolet, X-rays and gamma rays. We don't see any of that, so there's much more that our senses cannot see, our eyes, than they can. But that doesn't bother us at all. We can still live, we can still exist, we can still make wonderful art. So the fact that that stuff's missing doesn't matter to us. Our brains and our eyes have evolved to make use of the light that is available to us and the stuff we can see. So what, I hear you ask. So now we need to look at how else we've evolved. If we imagine we're thousands of years ago wandering across the savannah trying to find some food. There are predators out there, and as you can see one on the screen now, there's a lion hiding in the grass. Our brains have evolved to recognise patterns. And so as we're walking around trying to find ourselves some food, if we see a bit of a shape at the back there, actually I sort of recognise that. It's a sort of browny colour. I can see some sharp teeth, or I can smell a strong feline smell. We know, because we've evolved to do so, that we can put all of that information together and come up with the fact that we're being stalked by a lion and it would be a good idea to run away. So the net result of that is, as well as making use of the one bit of the electromagnetic spectrum that our eyes can observe, we're very good at looking at shapes and movement and smells and all the things that our senses provide in order to come up with a solution to what's in front of us. That's how we've evolved, and we're very good at it. And in fact, our brains enjoy doing it. You'll have all played that game when you're a child, where you look at the sky, you look at the clouds, and you make shapes from them. You make stories, the castles in the air that we see. And that technique, that ability to make shapes that we recognise from inanimate objects is called pareidolia. And I've got on the screen here now, you can see one cloud looks like a bear fighting a pig. Of course, all we've got there are two clouds lit by some orange light, and it's just water vapour. There's no real bear there, there's no pig there, but our brains can make that pattern. And so that bear fighting the pig is something that we can see. And it's really pleasurable for our brains to make these patterns because that's what they've evolved to do. So they get some fun from doing it as well. And I'm sure we've all had that fun with our children, and indeed when we were children, in generating those shapes from the clouds in the sky. So the fact that our brains like to make patterns, like to find shapes, is something that we can use in our art. We can take a piece of art, we can take some of the information away and know that our brains will put it back in, because that's what they've evolved to do. And so I'm going to show you now part of one of my pictures, which is called the Wave Unseen, and I've highlighted on the screen where there are some lost and found edges. What you can see there is you've got that line of clouds about 3/4 of the way up that go along, and here and there the line of the clouds disappears and then it reappears a little further on. That's a lost and found edge. However, when you look at the piece, you don't really notice the bits that are missing because your brain puts them in. Because of the same tone and the same sort of colour, your brain joins them up. But it actually gets more engaged with the picture because of those bits that are there missing. It's had to solve a little problem, a little puzzle to put those back in, and it enjoys doing it. So that's what a lost and found edge is. So if we now look at another picture here, this picture is called Splendour, and if you look at each of the arrows, you can see where there's a lost and found line in the clouds. What I've done here is I've blended in pastel the edges away, and they get softer, but then they come back again. And what your brain does, and it's quite happy to do, is to fill in the gap. But we can go a step further than that. We don't have to just do that in tone, because what you're seeing here is a tonal effect. We're blending it away into a different tone and bring it back to the original tone. We can do that in colour as well. And if you look at this picture, which is part of one called Silent Poetry, you can see not only have the edges been blended away, in some places they change hue as well, they change colour before I bring them back. So the one far on the right there, the green arrow, you can see it starts off as a chocolatey brown colour, disappears and comes back as a sort of a light rust colour. Similarly, you can see on the left hand arrow there, it goes from a sort of a rusty colour on the right, changes to some more of a chocolatey brown, the crossover point being where the arrow is. The blue arrow at the top I've also highlighted where there's a tonal change, and it's one of our standard lost and found lines as well. So you can see the cloud line there is it sort of stays a chocolatey brown colour but gets faded away and is brought back there. So there's two methods there of producing a lost and found line. You can do it tonally, blending the edge away into a different tone and then bring it back, or indeed you can take it a step further and you can change the colour as well. So there's various uses for lost and found lines that you can apply within your work, and we're going to have a look at some of them now. The first one is adding interest to your piece. And if you can look at this piece now, which is called Hale Bay, I've highlighted where some of the lost and found lines are. There's lots in the clouds there, they disappear and they come back, and that adds interest to the sky and movement, and your brain enjoys putting those back in. If you look at the horizon line there, I've blended that away as well. And that softening of the horizon away gives a nice painterly feel to that line there. And you can see there at the bottom arrow on the left hand side as well, the line of the waves that are slapping against the shore. I've put them in, I've taken them away, and your brain will follow those lines and it will fill in the gap and it will enjoy doing it. So in Hale Bay here, this picture, I've looked at techniques of using the lost and found lines to add interest to the piece. And as you look at it, it's more engaging than it would have been if I didn't have those lost and found lines. We're going to have a look at another picture now, which is called Privateer. And the big use of lost and found lines on this one is on the left hand side of the ship. I've totally blended that way into that light and that mist, but your brain still recognises it as a boat, and it adds interest by filling that little bit that's missing in. So the picture becomes more engaging as a result. So you don't have to use it just in clouds, just in skies, just on waves or whatever. You can use it in more hard objects as well, like here in this privateer ship. And it adds a sense of mystery and interest to this piece because we've blended that edge away. So there we are, we've had a look at lost and found lines to add interest. Now let's have a look at using lost and found lines to introduce ambiguity. In this piece, which is called Escape, there are lots and lots of lost and found lines in that sky. I've deliberately put some in, joined them up, given it two options where it could join up. It's a whole mishmash, and you can have lots of fun with your brain playing with those lost and found lines and trying to follow the various lines through the picture. Now if you look at the green line that I've put on top of the picture in the lower half, you can see what I've tried to do in this piece is to use those lost and found lines to slowly spiral your eye in by following them to the bird at the bottom. And I said this piece is called Escape. So I wanted you, when you looked at the piece, to be guided around it with that ambiguity and that spiral to end up with a bird that is escaping into the light. The next piece we're going to look at is called The Age of Tin. And again, there's lots of lost and found lines in this piece as well, and lots in the waves. I've highlighted just a couple of obvious ones with the green arrows there in the middle. But what I'm looking at here is how we've introduced ambiguity into the piece. There's the tin mine with a light behind it, top left there, and the cliff drops away there into the sea. However, it disappears. There's a lost line there, and I bring it back in again where the second red arrow is. But at this stage, your brain's wondering, is that a separate rock? Is it part of the cliff? Or is it something completely different entirely? It could be either of those things. And again, the third dark tonal patch on the right there, is that continuation of the rock? Is that a continuation of the slope of the cliff? It's ambiguous. And your brain likes that ambiguity, and as a result, it will try to figure out, and it will engage more strongly with this picture. It's kind of great fun, and it's good fun to use these techniques in your work. Now, the third picture I'm going to look at that introduces ambiguity is called the River Fruin Valley. And the obvious thing that I've highlighted in green here is the lost and found line in the River Fruin that flows through this Scottish glen. Now, if you look at the blue arrows now, I've put them onto little points that could be clouds, they could be hills, they could just be dark or tonal areas, and it's not definite. And your brain will have lots of fun trying to decipher this picture. The foreground ridge is obvious with the trees there, and I've put a few trees in one of the ridges on the right, but the rest I've left ambiguous. And I've used the lost and found lines within the picture to make you work and make you puzzle over whether an area is an area of land, whether it's an area of sky, whether it's clouds or whatever. And as a result, hopefully, the picture becomes more engaging. So far we've had a look at lost and found lines to add interest, and we've had a look at lost and found lines to introduce ambiguity. The next thing I thought I would look at is the use of the lost and found lines to lead the eye around the picture, to introduce leading lines. The first piece I'm going to show you is a piece called Wanderer. And if you look in the sky there on the top of these two pictures, you can see the lines of the clouds backwards and forwards. They disappear, they come back in, they change colour, they change tone. You can have indeed lots of fun finding your way through the sky there, and it's got lots of interest. However, this has been done deliberately because what I want to happen in this piece, which you can see from the direction of the green arrows, is rather like a pinball machine or a bagatelle machine. I want your eye to be taken down these leading lines diagonally, and eventually they will end up on that yacht, which is partially hidden on the right hand side in the mist there. So no matter where you end up in, your eye lands in this picture, the leading lines caught in the sky, augmented by the lost and found lines, would take your eyes slowly down the picture and deposit you at the yacht, and again your brain will be titillated in doing this. The next picture is similar in composition, but I've taken it a step further this time. This piece is called Journeyman, and what I've done, I've used lost and found lines and hard edges and soft edges and colour changes, etc. And I've lined these up deliberately, and you can see these with the yellow lines that I've put on, where harder edges or features line up, and they absolutely take your eye straight down to that red sail at the bottom there. And so I've put more in than just that bagatelle pinball machine that we had in the earlier piece, and now in this piece, which is called Journeyman, I've lined everything up deliberately to pull your eye down to that sail, and this is a technique you can use in your work as well. The next thing I thought I'd have a look at is the use of lost and found lines to augment a focal point. This piece here, which is called Winter Light, and it's quite similar to a piece I've done recently called Beach Light. Now, if you look at the waves in the front there on this very tranquil beach scene, highlighted in green, with the green arrows, you'll see there's lots of lost and found lines, and these add interest to the piece. But the key thing I want to show you here is the focal point, which is the lighthouse in the difference. What I've done from each side as you move in from the horizon, I've gone from a lost line to a found line in the middle, where it's much harder edged where the lighthouse is, and this draws your eye in to the focal point. So I've used a lost and found line here on that horizon to augment that focal point, to pull your eye in. So really what you could call this really is a found and lost line as opposed to a lost and found, but it does the same effect. You can see it's soft on the left hand side, becomes hard, and get soft again. And that use of those softer edges pulls your eye into that focal point. Now similarly, at the light at Lane's End, which is a mysterious piece, I think could possibly be a book cover, we've got that light in the cottage in the distance. And the way, again, I've drawn your eye into that is by having ambiguous lost and found lines on the horizon line. And you can see I've used the green arrows to highlight where these are. And the one to particularly talk about perhaps is that tree or land on the left-hand side there. It's a slightly different colour, slightly different tone. Is it a tree? Is it a bit of landscape? Is it a distant building? Who knows? But it's much softer than the edge of the cottage, which is right next to it on the right, where you can see the light coming out. And similar effect there on the right-hand side coming in. There's some softer passages there which help draw your eye into that cottage with the light. And these last two examples have shown you how you can use lost and found lines and softer edges to augment your focal point. So the next thing I thought we'd look at, the next technique for these lost and found lines, is using them as a gateway. And on this piece here you can see deliberately I've left the lost and found line just above that light point where they've got that dark blue as a gateway to allow that light to stream through. And I point that out with the end of the red arrow there. As the light streams down from the bright spot top right, it's got a natural gateway to come through and illuminate the sea or the land there. And it feels right to have that gap. So yeah, so what I've got here is a gateway. Now in this piece, which is called The Battle for the Souls of Men, I'm not a massively religious person, but this is a religious piece. The first thing to note is that line of river in white coming down through the piece. There's two obvious lost and found lines there, and that's there to introduce interest. And rather like in the previous sea piece, the blue arrows, they highlight the light streaming, not highlight, sorry, they allow a pathway for the light streaming top left down to the church where the land is caught. And as you can see, there's a lost and found line at each layer of cloud there, which is a natural pathway for that light to come through. And the light, of course, in this picture being symbolic of a god or something like that, whatever you believe in. And if you look closely, and I've ringed it in red top right, I've hinted at the devil as well in this piece. So the battles for the souls of men here, gateways to allow the light through from lost and found lines, and also some lost and found lines to add interest. The last piece I'm going to look at when we're looking at a gateway is this piece here, which is called The Loss of the Hanover. If you look closely, and I've ringed it with the green ellipse there, you can see three masts of a ship that was a shipwreck off the Cornish coast here in the UK that was carrying bullion. And I've made these masts very subtle. So I've introduced some pathways, some gateways with lost and found lines in order to help your eye get taken to the masts. Because normally when people see this picture, and it's quite a big piece, they don't spot the masks until I tell them, or they spend some time looking at the piece, and then they're suddenly apparent. So the first gateway I'm going to look at is the top arrow. And rather like the previous piece, the battles for the souls of men, there's a natural pathway for the light from that bright spot to come down towards those masts, and that will help your eye follow it. And the lower of the red lines, the arrows there, I put through a gap in the waves, which again forms a gateway up for your eye to travel from the bottom right into the piece towards that shipwrecked ship and those masts that are partially hidden. So in this way, I've introduced gateways with lost and found lines, and also use those gateways to lead your eye where I want it to go. Of course, with lost and found lines, you're not limited to landscape work. You can put them into all sorts of pictures. I don't do too much still life and portraiture work, but I do a little bit. And I've used lost and found lines in this piece, which is called a fade in bouquet. The first lost and found line is on the left there. I've made that edge in the shadow disappear. And that makes the piece look like it's lit from the right hand side, particularly when it's coupled with that bright spot on the vase there. So the upper of those light blue arrows is pointing where that lost and found line. The second one I wanted to point out to you as well is where the whole piece goes grey. I've deliberately made the edge of the vase on the right hand side there completely disappear. But your brain will carry that line on down through, because it likes to do it, and it works expecting to see the line, and it adds interest. The whole piece really is about the impermanence of everything, and whilst the flowers themselves will fade, I wanted to make the point that the vase and everything else that we know in time will fade as well. And I've tried to use lost and found lines to illustrate that point. So here's the use of a couple of lost and found lines in a still life. Similarly, it can be used in portraiture. This is a self-portrait I did. My wife does say that she doesn't recognise this glum person, however I'm not so sure. Now if you look at the left-hand side of the piece, illustrated with the red arrow there, you can see the whole of that side of the face is missing. But because our brains love to find those shapes and find those patterns, it gets reintroduced in our mind. So we know this is a three-dimensional shape of a head because our brain puts it back in. And lost and found lines in portraiture can be very powerful. You can take away as much as you want nearly, as long as you leave enough clues for the brain to put the information back in. So there we are. We've had a little bit of a journey now through the use of lost and found lines, this painterly technique to add interest to your pieces. I hope you got some inspiration from looking at it, and there's something here that you can apply to your own work. Thanks very much. Hello again. Thank you so much for taking part in the lesson today. I hope you've gained lots from it and lots that you can take forward in your own art. Thank you very much.